Do 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 do.
My name is Suhail Rajani and I am a software engineer at Zalosoft. Today, this session is about SQL Server Profiler. So basically, in this session, we'll be looking into SQL Server Profiler tool. What is it used for, some of the basic uses of SQL Profiler and how it is set up. How can we monitor our server activities using the SQL Server Profiler? So we'll look into that. Let's start by That's the agenda of our today's session. What are the basic main highlights of SQL Profiler, the main concepts, some of the key terms, how to analyze slow learning queries, how to analyze deadlocks, and about SQL trace. So let's start up with what SQL Profiler basically is. So SQL Profiler is basically a tool which is used to monitor your database service. So basically, whenever you are running an application which uses your database, your SQL Server database, so there are multiple times where you need to check that which of the queries or which of the SPs or which events are occurring on your database end. So in these cases, SQL Profiler helps you by tracing the queries that are being run by the application. So you can analyze that, and it can be used, it can be accessed from either you can go through your SQL Server Management Studio, and then from tools you can open it, or you can directly open it. Then it is basically used to debug database code. So there are multiple times when we are running an application and we are getting errors from the database end. So, and it is very hard to identify that which query is causing the problem. So in these cases, SQL Profiler helps us because we can trace all the queries and all the inputs that are being sent to the database, and how much time each of the query execution is taken and all of those cases. So we can monitor the performance of our server, of our database using SQL Server Profiler. So before I open the profiler and show you, let's see some of the basic terms that are used in SQL Profiler. When we'll be moving ahead, these are some of the terms that will be, you can see. So first thing is event. Anything, when we are SQL Server performs many actions, like each execution of a query is broken down into several events. So each and every statement, like if a query is starting to execute or if a SP is starting to execute, then it is executing the end of execution. All of these are small events. So everything, every action that your SQL server is taking, that is called an event. Now event are grouped into two things. One is event category. So for example, your stored procedure is an event category. Now in that event category, there will be many sub events. Now in an event category, the main sub part is an event class. So event class is basically anything, any event that comes up with some of the data regarding that event. So for example, like we'll see in a bit, that when an SP is executed, so the SP completed event shows you the data that is being sent in the SP. So that is an event class. Now, what are the data columns? The data columns are data columns are basically the attributes of the events. So when we'll see the SQL profiler, there will be different attributes to every event. For example, the duration or its ID and other aspects as well. So all those attributes are considered as data columns. Then comes filter. So while creating a SQL trace, you can add in filters based on what data do you want, what kind of data do you want, or from which database you want to just trace. Like there are cases when your server must be having tens or 15s of database and you just want to trace any one of those. So the filters and these type of things come handy in those cases. Now template, whenever you start creating an SQL Server trace, there are some of the by default templates that SQL Profiler provides you, and you can create some of your own as well. So that will be the template. The trace is basically the capturing of those events. So whenever we capture any event, that is a trace. Now it can be a capture of just one events or 5 events. So those are the traces, and that we can store and reuse it at different point of time. So that is something that we'll be looking into. So firstly, we'll see that how an SQL profiler template is being created. Now let's So here I have a database and I have opened its SQL profiler. You can either open the SQL profiler from going to your SQL Server Management Studio tools, and then here you can open an SQL Server profiler, or you can directly search for SQL profiler. And here it is, and you can open it from here as well. Then when you open it, you need to give your database credentials. And here is where you create your trace. So we talked about the templates of traces. So there are multiple by default templates. Like here is an SP count, which have only the which traces only the function where you count the total of SPs. And there are several others as well. You can either use standard, or you can create a blank and then define for yourself. You can even save the trace. Like you can go to save to file, and then it will tell you ask you where to save the trace, and you can give the path and the trace will be saved. You can even save this trace to a table. So there are times when we need to create a log of the trace in our database. So in these situations, when we need to create a log, we can save this trace to a table. And here is it. For example, I need to start my trace and I need it to end in a certain amount of time. Like I'm starting my trace right now and I need my trace to end in about 20 minutes or 30 minutes. So I can set in my trace timer here. One more feature is that I don't need to set a time duration. I just need to tell it that when to stop. I don't know. I'm not sure in minutes. I'm just telling you the exact time that the trace needs to stop at 6 p.m. So I'll just deselect this checkbox and I'll give it time here. Then we go to event selection. Now, as I told you, every single action or every single activity that is traced is an event. Like you can see all of these are events. Now you can see this, like this broker, it's an event class. So here in SP, like we can see all the three things. Let us go back to the presentation. So yes, there were three basic terms regarding events. One was the event itself, one was event category, and one was event class. So here we can see that these are all events. This is stored procedure is an event category, and then RPC is an event class. So RPC has three events in it: starting, completed, and the output parameters. Similarly, SP has some of the events inside it. So these are the things, and these are the events that we can select from while creating a trace. Whenever we need to create a trace, we need to be sure that what we need to capture. So we don't have to select everything, because then it will be a hard nut to crack for us, that what we need to pick up from the trace. So we need to very sure about what events do we need to capture. Like if I am running a trace and I need to just catch all of the SP calls. So I'll be looking into RPC completed, RPC starting, SP completed, and stuff like that. Now here you can see the columns. So these are basically the data columns. Now these decide what data will be fetched for each event. Like there is an application name, client process ID, database ID, database name, durations, event sequence, group ID, host name, and stuff like that. So there are multiple data columns and we can select what data do we want with our events. So here I'm going to start a normal trace. I'm going to choose standard defaults and I'm going to run it. So you can see that there are multiple data columns coming up with my trace and I haven't selected anything. I've just created a normal trace with a default template. So there are certain columns selected by default. You cannot see the column. You can see the SQL Profiler concept slide.
Excuse me. Hello.
Hello.
I think your screen is stuck and we are unable to see what actions you are performing.
Okay,
We can
let
only,
me.
yes.
Can you see the SQL Profiler screen now?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. I'll open a trace once again for you all to see. So here we give our database credentials and here we create a trace. Like we can select any template. There are multiple templates, or you can just go to blank and create a template and just select the data columns, whatever you feel like. I'm going for standard right now. Here are the events. Like for my standard template, these are the events that will be displaying. However, I can select more. I can go for show all events and show all columns. This will show me every available event and every available column. I can select any of these and I can trace it. Now, we saw in the previous slide that there are events, there are event categories, and there are event classes. So here you can see the RPC completed, RPC starting. So these are basically event class. The events are basically the events are broken into parts. Like the stored procedure is an event category. So there are multiple events that will come under the category of stored procedure. Then there comes a class, RPC class, where there are certain events that come under this class. Like there is an SP class, there are certain events that come under SP class. So these are basically the division of events. Now here we can see some columns like SPID, start time, end time, binary data, client process ID, duration, and all. So these are basically the data columns. Now the data columns help us identify or help us decide that what data do we need for each of the event. Like if I am trying to catch an SP call, that which SPs are being called and how much time is the SP taking. So I'll be checking the duration point, that I need the duration, that how much time does the SP took to execute, that how much time does this event took to completely execute, what was the start time of the event, what was the end time of the event. These are something that I would need. So that's why we will select these. There are multiple other checks as well, other IDs as well. Like if I want to see, I'm running a trace on multiple databases and I want to see which database is a particular trace from. So I'll select the database ID and database name. Similarly, I can check the error as well. So that will give me an error code. Like if I'm having an error at any of the event, the error data will show me what the error is. It will show me the error code. And similarly, we have multiple multiple options to select from. These are all the data columns from where we can select it. So here I have run the SP, I've run the trace. Now you can see that my trace has been opened and there are multiple columns that shows me the data regarding to each event. So while selecting the event, there are certain more things, like we can add filters to this particular event. Like I'll show you in a bit that how we can add. You can see it on the slide as well, that while selecting any of the events, we have an option to add filters to that event. Like if I'm going for a database, like if I need to select a database for which I need to run my trace. So I'll just select on any of the columns and it will show me the filter here. So I need to filter the database name. I need to I can go here and I can type in, like I want only sales DB. So now when I run this trace, it will only catch the events that will be happening for this particular database. And similarly, we can use for multiple items. I can put a filter on database ID, on duration. Like if I only want to capture the events that are taking more than, let's say, 1 minute. So I can put in a duration and it will ask me that to put in the time equals, not equals, greater than, less than, or I want the end time filter I can use, or any of these that they are available that we can filter out our events while creating. Now once we run the trace, we have an option to either, like for example, I'm running a trace and I have got quite a lot of trace events. Now I need to pause my trace and I need to filter out those events, or I need to see those events. I need to see the calls in those events, the data of those events, but my trace continues to run. So there are options in SQL Profiler where I can pause my trace, I can restart it, I can clear my trace screen, or I can finally stop it as well. So these are some of the options in my trace. Now here you can see there are options like this button. You can stop the trace. So I just stop the trace. I can start the trace again. Once I stop the trace and then I start, my current trace will be cleared and it will start a new trace. But when I pause and I start, so it will just continue the trace. I can clear the trace screen. So these are a certain basic tools that SQL Profiler gives us to ease our capturing of events and helps us to identify the events and work on it to our ease. It gives us provider very much ease of access. Now now you have started a trace, the trace is getting the calls. Now you need to step into those events and you need to see that what the data is being called off, or what the calls are being, the text data or the application details, the database details, and all those sort of stuff. So that you can select, you can even select multiple traces, like you've got tens of 50 or 100 event trace, and you just need to filter out, you just want to see some couple of traces, so you can just select those traces and you can see the data, the text data of those traces, that if a profiler call is being like if an SP call is getting, so I can just select certain number of traces and I can check that which SP calls are being used in those events. Let's look into that as well. So here is my trace. I am cleaning the trace so that can be started again. Now there is I'm running a simple SP. I'm running a simple code, select tariff from sales. I'm sorry, my database is having some problem. Tariff from sales. Yeah. So here my query is being executed. And here you can see that my trace has been called off. Now I can pause this and I can see the events, that which events are being called for the query that I executed. So you can see there are multiple traces because I have just selected a default trace and I just ran a query. So here are multiple cases. Now if I want to see the text data for all of them, so that will be a very much problematic situation for me because it will having too much of data. So now I can go and check it out. Like I can see the start time, end time. So you see, I can see many of the different traces, different events here, but the query that I executed, it's here. So after this query, there are many traces. So basically, my query is a quite long one, and it's taking too much time to execute because there are multiple records. So that's why what the SQL server does, SQL server breaks the process into batches. So here you can see that a batch completed, then a batch started, batch completed. So what it does is it breaks my query into smaller parts and I can see it that it is executing my query in batches. So here it how it works. And here I can see my process ID is same. Like here my process started. And here you can see there are other database names as well, because in my SQL server, there are multiple databases and I haven't selected any single one from the filter. So that's why it's showing me multiple database entries for which it's working. Now you can see the SP ID is changing because it is working for different SPs, different programs it's working for. And here you can see that now since I have paused, my execution start time is available, but my end time isn't because I had already paused this. So these are the ways where you select a certain number of events which you want to use, and then you can just capture the events and you can check the events which you want to. Like I showed you the duration that. So basically what happens is there is a performance issue occurs quite a lot of times. The major issue we face is a performance issue that our customer or our users are using the application and it's taking too long to process the data or to fetch the data from a certain database or for a certain screen. So how do we identify which execution or which event is taking too long? So like I showed you that we can put in filters in the beginning. So for duration, we can put in a filter. Let's say that for more than 10,000 microseconds, we can put in a filter, or for more than 20,000 microseconds. So it will only capture events that are taking too long to execute. And then we can see that which are the events that are taking too long to execute, so we can work on their performances. Then one major problem which comes across is the deadlocks. So what a deadlock basically is, a deadlock is something our SQL server has some of the resources that it provides to certain so it provides to every process certain resources. Now when multiple processes ask for some certain resources and every process is dependent on every other process, like for example, if process A and process B are requiring some of the resources. Now process A first require resource 1 and then it wants resource 2, and process B requires resource 2 and then resource 1. Now process B already has resource 2 and process A already has resource 1, but they have locked each other's resource, so the other process cannot gain the free resource which they require. So in cases like those, the deadlock occurs and any one of the process has to stop. The SQL server stops any one of the process to free the resource so that any other process can use it. So in these cases, deadlocks occur. So SQL Profiler provides us options to even catch the deadlock events or the deadlock graph. So there is an example. You can run a trace for, let's say, 24 hours, and you can select just the deadlocks. So if any deadlocks occur during those 24 hours, it will be captured in the trace. And after the 24 hour, you can just pause the trace and you can check whether or not there has been deadlocks. So it shows you that where the deadlock occurred. It even shows you a deadlock graph, so you can see which resources were required, which processes caused the deadlock to occur. So these are some things that happens. Now we see the SQL trace. SQL trace has some basic events, like an SQL trace can be created from your SQL Server Management Studio as well. It is a programmatical thing. Like you can use a query to create a SQL trace and the query will give you output, or it can store your trace in the database as well. So there are certain events that can be called as a query to run, and they are mostly useful when you know the event. See, the problem occurs is many of the times you don't know the event that we need to capture. So SQL Profiler, because it gives us many more information, so it is better to capture your events or trace your events using the SQL Profiler. But there are ways to even catch your events. Like you can see, let me zoom this one for you. So here you can see there is a query window where we have declared some variables and we have executed the trace. And in the output window, it just brings us the trace just like the SQL profiler, but it does not gives us every feature that the profiler gives us. So the trace can be created programmatically, but it just gives us some limited features that can be traced. Using a profiler, you can get much more aspects of the trace. So that was all I had. Let's summarize all of the things that we saw today. We saw that SQL Server Profiler is a tool that can be used to debug or troubleshoot, or we can monitor the database activities that are being occurred. Traces can be created, and every trace we create, we can store it and we can reuse it at another point of time whenever we require it. We can filter the data, or we can filter the columns which we want to see. It can be used to identify slow queries, like we saw that we can filter the duration of the queries. We can identify the deadlocks, and we can, the major reason of SQL Profiler where it is most used is to monitor the server performance, and it helps us to improve it, because until and unless we don't know which of the profiler calls or which of the SQL queries are being responsible for decreasing the performance of our application, we cannot exactly work on those. Like in a real world environment, we have large databases, and we cannot just keep guessing and doing the improvement of performance or improving the code and on every parts. So it helps us to identify where the performance is being decreased, and we can work on those aspects. And we just saw that SQL traces can be created programmatically. It can be created using queries as well.